that whole thing about women just having to kind of be strong, that projection of like, I'm strong, I'll put up this wall so I can be on that same level as like a man, I'll be seen in that way. There's this beautiful like strength in being soft and vulnerable that I think is dismissed entirely, especially with women that live in a city like this where you're constantly moving to try and get up that ladder and, you know, be put on that same level as like your male colleague, you know? So what I'm finding in a lot of the work that I do is, especially with Black women, this idea of being the strong Black woman. It's like there's actually a lot of beauty and strength and power in being soft and speaking from this place of vulnerability that we're not allowed to do because it makes us seem weak. It makes us seem unintelligent to move from a place of emotion, to move from our intuition as women. So I think what I'm doing now is in the work that I'm doing is reaching out to my friends, reaching out to women and show them, you know, I'm here for you, whatever it is that you need to speak about. At the very, very least, like, tell me how you're doing. Tell me about your experience in this. And it's a scary place to go to somebody who doesn't have the same experience in like middle America.
And I think what we're in is a feelings fight at the moment. And that's not to trivialize it all. I think that's what it is. And one of the things that I'm finding myself doing in terms of thinking about how to mobilize this as a political moment is to say, well, how do you move from intellectualizing, which I think takes facts as kind of a sort of God, right? And say, how do you talk about affect and feeling? And this comes back to this question of, you know, thinking of vulnerability as a strength. And so for me, in terms of what this means for women as a whole, I would hope that this can be a catalyst for us to live more freely and to take feminism as a movement toward humanizing us in our totality, as opposed to reaching some standard of strength or maleness or whatever it is the standard may be, which I think always reduces someone.
I think education can go a long way towards that. I think representation in the literature that you read can go a long way towards that. There's this, I think, a 10-year-old girl in New Jersey who said she was so tired of reading about white boys and their dogs. Like a whole new reading list. Yes, and I love her. I wish I was her. So I think that there are definitely ways where you can write your body back into a literary or creative tradition, but how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think something that like you guys have been picking up on is insisting in some way that people take you as a person and not as a woman, or whatever myth of a woman is, like with your wedding ceremony. I mean, something that I, as a woman, have only in like the last couple of years have suddenly realized, oh, this really frustrates me, is when, like, I'm an actor, writer, whatever, I meet somebody at a party a man who is also a writer or a producer or something, and we start talking, and maybe it's not even at a party, it's like at a coffee shop or through another friend or through some other business context. I say, hey, that's amazing, you're writing that kind of thing. I'm really fascinated by that. Do you want to go grab a cup of coffee sometime and talk about that? And I show up for the coffee, and he thinks it's a date. Mm-hmm. And this happens so many times.
Yeah.
And the thing, I was talking to a male friend of mine, they're like, well, look, you're a beautiful woman, you know, it's kind of like flattering, you know, guys, we're just sort of, well, we just never know what's going on. And I was like, yeah, but like before you see me as a person, you see me as something to sleep with, or you see me as in this context. And that whole myth of this is what women are taking first into the world is really damaging, because then what happens is then when I turn this guy down to say like, oh shoot, actually I just was really wanting to talk about like writing something together. If we then progress on that business relationship, then I'm always nervous in the back of my head of like, oh God, does he think like I'm still into him? Or what if I turn him down? Is he going to get like really upset at me emotionally because I don't show up for him in that way? And what happens if I start dating in this other way? So it really complicates things that I think keep women from being taken seriously in starting those new relationships.
Yeah, and
yeah.
But it's so incredible to me that this is like a thing that actually happened. And I have a friend who we have a joke about, our first date, and it was just like, no, you thought it was a date, and I thought it was a business meeting because I was trying to break into your industry kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was like, it's cool that this is not a date. Like, we can still, have a bite to eat and have a drink. And I was like, okay. And then and then I remember posing a question to him and being like, what am I supposed to do? So every time I ask someone out for a drink or for coffee, or they ask me, I'm supposed to say, by the way, this isn't a date. Like, that's so socially awkward and not fair to me to have to say it. And he was like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But I remember that sometimes it's even been so far to where it's like, guys have knowingly, they know that I have a boyfriend, and I ask them out like casually, and then they're like, oh, we still thought this was a thing. Like, even though you have a boyfriend, I was like, oh, we just thought you were like open about cheating or something like that. Like, they took it that far in their mind to just completely redefine the relationship, where it was like, and I remember at one point I said, like, I'm an excellent friend to have, though, even though this isn't a date. And then the guy was like, well, I don't need any more friends. And I was like, well, what? Like, what are you? And he's like, you just have all the friends that you need, but the only thing, like, our relationship or friendship had no other benefits besides being like something romantic or something sexual, which it does. Like, as a woman breaking into whatever industry or just trying to make friends in a new city, it's just like, what are the rules now?
These men being raised, being like, if a girl is talking to you, she's interested. And if she says no, just keep persevering.
Yeah.
Like, every romantic
Like, she's
comedy,
playing hard to get.
She's playing hard to get. And it's like, no, you just have to believe it. And it's crazy that the onus is somehow still on us after we've already said no to then like make them feel okay. And it's like, not hurt their feelings. And we can't say no before the lunch or before the drink, because then, God forbid, they might have, then they'll be like, she's
so full of herself.
So full of
yeah,
herself.
You think that everyone wants to sleep with you. It's like, no, it's actually a thing I have to say.
Exactly. And it's just incredible to me that, like, not only like that, despite this being something that we have to deal with and like a mess we have to clean up, it's still our responsibility. Instead of just telling boys that, like, you need to actually listen to women and listen to what they say and not just totally dismiss their opinions and dismiss them as people.
Right.
To say that if you're not willing to like be in a relationship with me, then I'm being friend zoned.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want anything to do with you. And it's like, okay, so my body and my like existence is only good enough as long as it's appropriate for a relationship. But as a friend and a person, it means nothing.
Exactly. Like, I hate that look on the face, like when it just washes over them when they realize they aren't going to have a chance with you romantically at all. And it's just it just makes me so angry. Like, thinking of that face, but it's just like, I can't believe you're suddenly not looking at me as a human person because I can't exist for you the way you want me to, but that means I shouldn't exist at all.
It's like in every other case when there's like an instance of something happening over and over and over, we can be like, oh, this is terrorism, or this is like this group of people. Like, everything gets like stereotyped except for like violence against women. Instead, it's never like an epidemic that affects of men. Like, it's just always like a lone wolf or like or whatever. Like, it's never, I just don't understand how the numbers can be so high and yet we can't see it holistically. It's just incident. And it's never like, this is an issue that we need to talk to our boys about and talk to like men about.
Because it's like the entire half of the population versus just like this one terrorist, where it's like, oh, then all Muslims are terrorists.
Exactly.
It's just like this one guy. It's like, well, it's not all men. Yeah. It's just that one really bad guy.
It's just 10%.
Yeah.
That entitlement to your body and that entitlement to your emotional energy, I feel like, are linked. Maybe one seems more immediately dangerous than the other, but they're still linked. Where, I think it's part of a culture of toxic masculinity where boys aren't allowed to talk about their feelings unless it's in the context of a romantic relationship. And that's why an emotional connection with a woman feels like, oh, that can't exist unless it's a sexual or romantic relationship. That's something that I think, there's I think a bit of a sea change happening now, but we're still far away. There's, I think, people are trying to teach their kids this idea of more active consent. Like, hey, that little boy running around trying to kiss you, it's not because he likes you, and if you don't want it to happen, you don't have to let it happen. As opposed to like, oh, it's so cute, he's trying to kiss you without your permission. Like, he just likes you, guys.
This is like kiss rape.
Right. And but like that entitlement to your physical space, I think, is related. And I mean, like, just that sense of immediate danger is very real. Like, I was on the New York subway a couple of years ago. It was like late at night. It was me and like one guy and his two friends and like two other men like down the subway car, and he started talking to me. I was not interested. Tried to like just ignore him, and then he started saying like, I'm going to rape your chink cut. Like, very, you know, like it was incredibly aggressive, and my automatic response was just visceral fear. Just, I'm going to shut down. I need to like get off at the next stop. But we were stuck on the bridge. So stuck on this bridge for 5 minutes while he was kind of shouting all of these aggressive things. And nobody wanted to say anything, including me, because I think there was this palpable fear that like it would erupt into violence. And then, and yet afterwards, I was startled and felt guilty about feeling guilty about not saying anything, where it's like, oh, I should have said something. It was my responsibility to like not fight him verbally or like not say like, hey dude, that's not okay. So, you know, I think as women, we have a really complicated relationship with silence. Like, at what point is it dissent? At what point does it become, I don't know, like being complicit in like a system of oppression? Like, at what point do you use your voice, and how do you use your voice, and how do you balance that with needing to protect yourself sometimes?
Even if my knee-jerk reaction is to say something, I still often am like, oh, how do I don't know. There's always just that question of like, what is an appropriate response, and it infiltrates intimate relationships. It's not just like on the subway. It is that's really important as well. And I think just kind of a daily lived experience, but it's also just like when these subtle instances where you just do not know how to keep everyone's dignity intact and still say, but actually you're doing this in a way that is exploiting my gender, and it makes me really uncomfortable.
I think there's no real right or wrong way to react to any of that, to be honest. And I personally would rather speak out when something like that is happening to me versus not. Even if, I mean, how many of you know somebody who was victim of rape or survived, domestic sexual abuse, and everyone in here, it's like 1 out of 5 women. So, there's no wrong or right way. And in a lot of the instances, it's somebody that they knew intimately. So then it's become kind of okay because he's my husband, he's my partner, he's my lover. So then it's not really, for me personally, I don't think it's so much about the reaction or like dress less provocatively. It's more about like, let's talk about consent for a moment here. Let's teach these men, let's teach the men in our lives about consent, because we all think that's something everybody should know. That's like common sense. It's probably not. So let's talk about that for a moment. Like, hey, what do you think? What do you think it means does it mean anything when I go out dressed like this? Or when I do dress up for work, people are like, oh, you're dressed up nice today. If I'm dressed down, they're like, oh, it's normcore today. And I'm like, no, I'm just tired. Like,
going to the gym.
It doesn't mean anything. It just means that I'm a human, and this is just how I'm presenting myself to the world. I'm not even presenting myself. This is just how I look today, So I think a lot of it is about teaching each other what consent is, and that's easier said than done, but it starts with conversation.
Because we are basically starting from the bottom and moving up, because, it's not like men know what it's like to not be able to vote, kind of thing. And so I feel like when I think about feminism, or when I think about like what being a woman these days mean to me, is like, I want to be the kind of person that I wish I could have been or could have had when I was in those moments of vulnerability, and when I felt like I was threatened, and just be like, I wish to be that person that would have stood up for myself in those instances, or to would have, understood what it would take to just not feel threatened or not feel vulnerable. And so it's like, I'm very glad to be a woman, and even though life would have been much easier to have been a man, I feel like the things that I've achieved as a woman and hope to achieve and have yet to achieve, like there's a reason for that. And so I feel like, you know, I live life more passionately knowing that I'm working towards being this person that I wish I could have had when I was younger, because now it's like I have a very personal, you know, this personal account of my own history where it's like, you know, those XYZ shouldn't have happened, but it happened because of the system I was living in at a time, and it happened because we didn't educate men or our children in a way that would have been more productive for just the entire society or the entire race. So I think, you know, bringing these issues to light and understanding the value of education, or just, you know, letting children know that, you know, you could also be a fireman as a woman, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever it is that you want to be. That's just so important to know that people, or to know that children, or even middle America, are just exposed to these ideals that should have existed all along. But because we were living and growing up in a system that was not really, maybe not exactly against us, but wasn't really doing us any favors, almost like putting us in a place that would have been great and comfortable if we would have just let it ride forever. But that's not the way things should have been. It's like, well, we didn't need to always be homemakers or have men make our decisions. Like, we always had a voice, we just never had it to begin with the way they did.
What I've been considering lately is intersectional feminism, and in some way I'm still absorbing everything, and I haven't quite developed this yet, but I do think in some ways the election was a failure of intersectional feminism. So I've been considering, you know, how do I occupy my identity as a woman while also taking into account a multiplicity of identities, also as a woman of color, also, you know, from the privileged class background that I have. Like, how do I think more carefully about how all of those identities impact one another? And I feel so lucky right now to be in a room like full of incredibly intelligent women and being able to talk about vulnerability and like how we make that political in some ways, or how do we bring that into an arena of social change. So I've been thinking a lot about, you know, communities of women and a community identity, and how that very much has been kind of a way that women have supported each other long before we had, you know, a more 21st century vocabulary with which to talk about it in a social justice sense. So that's, I guess, something that I've been thinking about more.
I'm learning from this conversation is that there is a lot of power actually in learning from those experiences. Not to say learning what you should or shouldn't do, but to say, if you experience that feeling of feeling threatened in your body on a daily basis, if you just know what that is, to always navigate that in public space and private space, then that actually offers you, I think, a lot of insight about the world as it is. I think it offers you insight about things that need to change. And what I'm going to take from this conversation is how to mobilize that, how to politicize that vulnerability, and not to shrink from it, but to sort of step into it. Mm-hmm. And I think that is actually really powerful. So.
What I'm interested in is I want to be seen, and I want to be seen as an individual, and to be judged by the content of my character and not by my gender or anything else. My aunt is an artist, and she had this great thing she said once, like, I hate female artist shows. I think they're dumb. And I said, why? And she said, well, what, you think the men are having, men only, like, to do it as sort of, she wanted to be seen as whatever her art was and for what made her a person. And I think you're totally right. Like, look, my mother and the women who raised me were not weak women. They were not dumb women. They fought very, very hard for their lives and in their families. And so these stories are here. We just have these sort of like myths that are put on top of them from culture or society or whatever. So I think what I would like to focus on for myself is to just being seen as an individual and not in this sort of fog of whatever you're supposed to be.
I do love, this doesn't happen for me very often, but when it does, it's really, really powerful. So again, in those moments where these incidences have become pedestrian, it's almost like, okay, at this point, I'm going to call my sisters, I'm going to call all my female friends for that support and check in with them more often. And I think feminism and just being a woman is just looking out for other women.
Mm.
That's really what it is to me. Plain and simple. Gender equality is beautiful, but until women can, have the same opportunities and be on the same platform as men, then I'm going to look out for all of my sisters and make sure they're okay. And I'm also going to try and restructure a system that is just built for the equality of women. No one else is going to do it for us. Men aren't going to do it for us. So we have to do it for ourselves.
Yeah.